Welcome back. On Tuesday, the government is planning on bringing into Parliament 13 bills relating to the carbon tax and emissions trading scheme, with debate, they hope, to resume, or to begin, I should say, on the following Wednesday, so just the very next day. That is a pretty swift move from bills to debate, historically speaking. Joining me still on our panel, Paul Fletcher, from Sydney, and Graham Perrett is with us in Brisbane. I want to ask you, Paul Fletcher, there's talk of the opposition trying to set up separate committees for these bills. That would delay things somewhat. Is there any other reason to do that apart from delaying?
Oh, well, there certainly is, David. I mean, the set of measures which are proposed in relation to the carbon tax would make a very significant change to Australia's economy. $23 a tonne, $9 billion in tax revenue being raised at a time when our economy is under pressure. So these are very important economic policy proposals. We don't think they're good proposals, but whether you think they're good or bad, what is clearly the case is that the Parliament needs time to consider them seriously. Now, we have a committee system in our Parliament, both Houses of Parliament, to allow the substantive issues underlying legislation to be discussed, and allowing Australians who have an interest, who have a stake in the issues, to make submissions to those committees and to appear and to put their views before committees. So we think it's very important that a measure of this magnitude should be subject to the proper processes, the well-established processes under which our Parliament scrutinises issues, rather than simply having the bills rammed through to achieve a short-term political objective, which seems to be what this government is trying to do. And I might add, it would be very disappointing indeed if the Independents and the Greens were to agree to support a highly irregular procedure of doing that. That would be quite inconsistent with the principles which are normally stated by the Independents and the Greens as to the proper role of the Parliament.
Well, Julia Gillard thinks those principles are being adhered to. Here's what she said across in Auckland a little earlier this morning.
Carbon tax, carbon pricing legislation will be before the Parliament next week. It will go through the Parliament. It has sufficient support to go through the Parliament and start on the 1st of July next year, as we've been talking about for some time now. I do expect, as we see constantly from the opposition, that we'll see all sorts of wrecking tactics, but we will work our way through and ensure that the legislation does go through.
Graham Perrett, what's the rush on this if the legislation is not going to come into play until July next year?
David, two things. Could I just take issue with Paul, who called it a short-term political objective? That's ludicrous. This is a long-term economic, environmental and social objective. It's not a short-term political thing. I can assure you that, being someone who has a marginal seat. The second thing is, if Paul and the Liberal Party are so enthusiastic about committees, why did Tony Abbott refuse to let anyone from his party participate in the committee that was looking at bringing in climate change legislation? It makes a mockery to then turn around and say, oh, no. We believe in committees now and we have to have a whole new committee process. Come on, fair dinkum, guys. We've been talking about this. Was our election commitment in 2007, our election commitment in 2010.
Well, Graham, that's
now
that's
2011.
Just not right. It was not,
the second
it wasn't your election commitment in 2010 at all. Your election commitment was to do precisely the opposite of what you're doing. The Prime Minister went to the Australian
there was
people
always a
and
carbon
she said
tax
to the Australian people,
component
she
in
said
the
to the Australian
CPRS.
people, there will be no carbon tax under a government I lead. She is doing exactly the opposite.
You're trotting out your lines. You've got to go to the facts.
I'm repeating what is the truth.
The CPRS deal that we had with Malcolm Turnbull, that Tony Abbott ratted on, had a fixed-term price, had a carbon tax component. That was the deal. Okay,
Graham Perrett,
remember that. So we always said we'd price pollution.
Would the government try to guillotine the debate? Graham Perrett, would the government try to guillotine debate if it came to that?
You'd have to talk to Minister Albanese and we'd see what, those decisions are made in the moment on the floor. It's such a precisely balanced parliament that depending on where Bob Katter sits or, where independents sit, we don't know what's going on until the very last moment in terms of decisions. But the reality is this is not something being sprung on the Australian people. We went to 2 elections saying we'd price pollution and we intend to carry out that promise. And remember, Paul's committed to pricing pollution as well. The only thing is, the way he will do it, his plan, the Honourable Tony Abbott's plan, will put a greater price on it, and households will have to pay more. We're taxing the polluters.
Paul Fletcher, just some final comments on that.
Look, Graham is certainly right that both parties are committed to the 5% reduction from year 2000 emissions, but the critical point is this. This government is rushing to get this through, or that's what they're seeking to do, because they're desperate for a short-term political win after having the loss with the Malaysian People Swap being struck down by the High Court and a series of other political disasters. This is a very important change to the economic framework under which Australia operates, and it is appropriate that time be taken, consistent with the normal principles of the way the Parliament works, to study the details.
Okay, well, Paul Fletcher and Graham Perrott, unfortunately we're out of time, but thanks very much for joining me on AM Agenda.
David.
We will, of course, have
Thanks,
all the
David.
latest from New Zealand, the Pacific Island Forum throughout the morning, lunchtime agenda, as usual, at 1:30 this afternoon. Jed Carney is going to also be addressing the Press Club this afternoon. The ACTU president will be talking, among other things, about industrial relations reform and what that means for the union movement. And of course, David Spears will have PM Agenda at 4:15 this afternoon. Thanks very much for your company this morning. I'm David Lipson.